you can take one sensei, living or dead, aside from the obvious, aside from Yagi Sensei. I think when it comes to
Right.
Withthe practitioners, it's always Miyagi Sensei. They can accompany for a year, and you can take instruction from them for a year. Who would you invite?
Oh, very difficult.
Kia ora, I'm Tuari Dawson, and you're listening to the Invisible Sensei podcast.
A little bit about Antonsen Sensei. So it's really hard to know where to start. So is it the Kobudo? Is it the karate? Is it the living on Okinawa? Is it being a cool Canadian? When the coolest thing in the world you can be is a Canadian. Sensei, we'll get to some of the stuff that you've recently done, among it an imperial demonstration of karate and Kobudo, which is just amazing. I want to really save that to later in the podcast because I want to unpack that a little bit. But in terms of your karate, in terms of your Kobudo, what are you working on right now?
I'm just basically a student still. I'm training almost every day, and I'm not really out in the forefront of things. I just kind of like to take a back seat and train hard every day and not open my mouth too much. And basically, like lots of us old timers, just continue training.
If you've had an opportunity to train with Antonsen Sensei, you will know this already. But if you haven't, you will know that kind of his dojo away from the dojo is a Namanui shrine in Naha. And I remember very well being amongst a few others that Antonsen Sensei took us through some ikukata. And it made an impression on me. I remember talking to James and sort of saying, who's this Dan Antonsen Sensei? And he was very complimentary. And of course, you're teaching the Asato amongst many of your other things. Being very deeply into Okinawan martial arts, karate and Kobudo in particular, and living on Okinawa, and taking people around, actually taking tourist groups and giving people an opportunity to view the island. What is something, quite apart from the Budo aspect of your training, that you would like people to know about Okinawa?
Well, first off, I think the philosophical aspects of being a martial artist are more important. We all get older, and I'm going to be 66 here in 2 months, and we all lose our physical capabilities. We get slower and weaker, but it's the mental aspects that I think are most important. The development of character, and just have fun at what you're doing. And one of my first senseis in North America was Richard Kim. We called him O Sensei Richard Kim. And a big part of his training were lectures at night, lectures on the philosophical aspects of the martial arts. And I think this is something that I carried since then, and probably the most important stuff that he taught. And also, Patrick McCarthy, Hanshi, who was one of his senior students. And I think he was a big influence on McCarthy Sensei's path on as a researcher and taking it beyond the physical aspects of martial arts.
I think Richard Kim is one of those people that I remember that I had a number of his books as a younger man. And
excuse me.
It was really interesting sort of reading, about his past, his history and all those sorts of things. And in terms of Hanshi McCarthy, you can sort of really see that starting point of a journey that would kind of span decades and countries and a whole range of experience. So for you, in terms of your formative training, who were some of the people that you kind of went, oh, I just want to be like that? I mean, you've spoken about Richard Kim Sensei. What was it about training with him that kind of inspired you to be a lifer?
So for me, the moment I stepped foot in the dojo, the second time when I was 20, I knew I was hooked for life. And I had taken judo as a child for about 4 years in the 60s and early 70s. And of course, took time off to be a teenager. And when I was 20, I had to find a positive direction in my life. And I went back to the dojo. And at that point, I knew I was a lifer. And Richard Kim was one of the big influences initially. I had joined a strip mall dojo with a very good teacher, but it was more commercialism. But he belonged to Richard Kim's organization, and that's where he got some of the deeper training and the philosophical aspects of martial arts. And the first time I went to one of his, he would do camps. So we would do 1 week long, intense seminars, full days, starting with Tai Chi at 5:30, and then 2 training sessions in the day, and ending with a lecture. And the lecture would start at 7, and it would go until he was done. So they could go 2-3 hours or late into the night, where he would talk about other aspects of the martial arts.
I've read accounts of Miyagi Sensei was very similar in the sense that he would lecture his students, to create impromptu lectures after training, and lecture on life and character and all those sorts of things. Now, you do, you kind of straddle a really interesting kind of line. Well, I don't know if it's a line, but 2 things. In that, you've competed at quite a high level, but also this extremely traditional martial artist, karateka kobudoka. How do you approach competition? How do you approach and keep those things kind of, I guess, in balance? I wonder if that's the right way to say it.
So the competition part for me was mostly fun and to compete. I was never a champion. Sometimes I would medal depending on, but I was always middle of the pack type competitor, and I really got a lot out of it. But it was very small part of my training. And the traditional dojos that I train in, competition is a very small part of the emphasis in the dojo. But it has its good points, and the competition is always good. And I would compete in the Okinawan World Tournaments. First one, they had the pre-tournament in '95, was the first one I went into, and was totally blown away. And then the second one, the first tournament, world tournament, was 1997, which was an eye-opening experience. And I remember my sensei at the time, he medaled in that tournament, which was quite a high up, because the competition was over the top compared to North American tournaments. Then they had the 1999 tournament, and I only missed one of the world tournaments. I had broken my ankle, so I missed one. And I medaled twice, but I think just I was in a good niche, and was just there at the right time. I was never really one of the best, but competitive.
You say that with the customary Canadian humility, which I've very much come to value. I remember one time we were at Namanui, and I made the mistake of saying, hey, talking about arm pounding and kotiki tai, and I just remember that you said, "Oh, let's do some," and I just remember having circle-shaped bruise about the size of an orange on both forearms the following day. So I will not make the mistake on my return visit. In terms of your personal training, Sensei, how was it changed and shaped over the years? And so in terms of your training, what was it like in the early days? I mean, around conditioning, sparring, kata, bunkai, all of those sort of things. And how has that sort of evolved, changed, and perhaps improved as you've gone on?
Good question. In the beginning in North America, it was mostly about kumite. And I started in the early 80s again, 1982, and maybe at the end of what they called the blood and guts era. So there was a lot of fighting. There was bleeding in the dojo. It was kumite almost every night at practice. And but after I started coming to Okinawa, there's no free sparring in the traditional dojo. We have prearranged sparring. So I kind of drifted away from that aspect. And it was probably the right time. I was getting into my 30s and 40s. And, the fighting is a 20s and a younger man's game. I do think the way we train now, like you mentioned, the conditioning and the forearms, much tougher students. I remember the first time I came to Okinawa, and the sensei's like, "Go ahead, hit me, hit me." We were doing limb conditioning, and he goes, "If I fight you, I just walk in and kill you." And what he means is any of the techniques that I could throw at him, he could probably take and just walk through my offensive, and very hard hitting and very strong gentleman. And to emphasize that, with the first Kobudo teacher I had one of these tournament North American bows that I paid a lot of money for, and it was nice and thin and fast and whipped through the air really nice. But he stood in front of me and goes, "Go ahead, hit me." And you could take that bow and two-handed, and it would just break over him. And so at that moment, I got a traditional Okinawan bow that's would be hard to break over somebody.
For you, when you're using your weapons, someone Sensei, what are you looking for in your choice of weapons?
So for the tournaments in Okinawa, your weapons have to meet certain criteria. They have to be a certain weight, a certain length. They have to be a certain length compared to your body. Certain dimensions for a bow, it has to be 2.5 centimeters at the end, no less than 3 centimeters in the middle, and they weigh it and tag it before you can go in the tournament with it. So it's a substantial weapon.
Yeah, yeah. Do you do a lot of impact training in your own training, Sensei, with your weapons?
Every day. This morning. Mm-hmm.
Gosh, so you actually you'll hit pies and makiwara and stuff like that. Do you have a setup that you use, Sensei, to actually hit something with it?
So we have Kobudo makiwaras that we use. And just like karate, hitting the makiwara or a heavy bag or another person, you have to hit something. Yeah, and you have to throw the sai. You have to know what it's like to make contact. So at Asato Dojo, there's funny. After Typhoon, James Pankrat Sensei found a buoy. It was one of the ship buoys, one of the big rubber ones, and he hung it up, and it makes an excellent Kobudo makiwara. But you can make your own with a cross with 2x4s and wrap it with rope, or put kendo gear, or because I'm Canadian, we put hockey equipment on it, and you have to hit something.
So, Sensei, let me ask you this: in terms of if you could go back in time, or if you go back and you could speak to the guy, that young Dan Sensei who walked into the dojo, how would you shape his training? I mean, I know they probably wouldn't really want to change a thing, but ideally, what would you how would you have him start? What would you have him start doing, and what would you have him start doing right off the bat?
Well, I think for the younger people, the fitness level is important initially, and I'm an advocate of the traditional type of training, and basics over and over and over again. After 40, 50 years, we go to the dojo, we do basics to start every class. And this is the traditional way. A lot of people get frustrated. They're looking for the glory and the limelight, and they'll jump from dojo to dojo looking for the secret or the magic or whatever. And I think the magic is just shut up and train.
I read an article by Toichi Sensei, who was another one of Yagi Sensei's contemporaries, and he was talking about the way in which he approached karate, in the sense that he was talking about that everything lies in the basics. So for you, you're training with Yagi Sensei and the Meibukan. What has, moving from training with Kim Sensei into the Meibukan and sort of spending a substantial amount of time doing that, what's the flavor of your karate? What's the flavor of Meibukan that you try to bring out for your karate now, Sensei?
Good question. So Richard Kim Sensei considered himself a generalist. So he was Shorin-ryu, I was Gojyu-Ryu, and he taught Kobudo and Tai Chi and Pakwa and theory. And he said he was the base of the pyramid. And so he was big on lots of different kata that he would gather from everywhere. And so at one point, you know, he was teaching well over 100 kata. And he said the bigger the base of the pyramid, the higher the pinnacle or the capstone. I would say Meibukan is like the capstone of that pyramid. And Meibukan is Yagi family karate. So they inherited Gojyu-Ryu or studied Gojyu-Ryu from Choju Miyagi, of course. And but the Yagi family has their own family karate too, which is the Meibukan, which consists of 5 kata that were developed by Dai Sensei Meitoko Yagi in the early and late 70s. And so we do 5 kata above the regular Goju schools. And I think they're specialists, whereas Richard Kim Sensei was a generalist. And I went from Canadian Goju, which was from Bob DeGleesh lineage, to Goju Kai, which was Gogen Yamaguchi lineage. And when I came to Okinawa, I started Meibukan, which was the Yagi family lineage, which, you know, at that point I didn't drop, but I put aside years of training already and kind of started again, put on a white belt again, and I did what I called a core dump. I put all the kata that I had learned and a lot of the knowledge that I had learned in North America and put it on tape. So I stored it and then started again as a white belt in Okinawa in 1993.
Wow. I mean, well, that's certainly that typifies the idea of the beginner's mind. I mean, also having, you know, trained up to that point as well, having to kind of, I suppose, put egos and feelings on board to kind of pursue something. So here's an interesting question for you, Sensei. So, for whatever reason, an alien turns up, or a bunch of aliens with heads probably the same shape as mine. They turn up and say, "Right, Dan Antonsen Sensei, we're going to take you to a planet, and you're going to live there for a year. We'll take care of your food, your water, all the rest of that, but you're only allowed to practice 2 kata and 2 weapons."
Well, for karate, it would be because I'm Goju Sanchin, because it's the basic kata that we all struggle with for years and years and years, with the breathing and the tension and just the simpleness of it. And I like Seisan. I like Seisan because it's short, it's powerful. I can put a lot of effort into it and not get winded. 100% max. It's got not the most techniques within the kata, but some really useful techniques that I think are good. So those are my 2 favorite. With the Kobudo, it would have to be one. I like the Tunfa. And probably I always did Sai in tournaments, but it would have to be a bow kata because bow is like the #1 weapon. There are more bow katas than probably any other weapon. And so one bow kata, which would probably be Chinin Shikiya Naka no Kon, because it's one of the longest with a lot of techniques. And I always liked Chatnyara Sai for, it's a little repetitive, but I like the opening of it and how you draw one side out. And that was always my go-to tournament kata.